Now I will accept another motion. Bill?
Can I? Yes, I request a motion to dismiss the ethics complaint 2018-01 for the following reasons. Insufficient evidence to proceed because the preponderance of the evidence does not support issuance of a notice to proceed with an allegation of a violation of the City Code of Ethics. 2, there is no substantial likelihood of success on the merits through an adversarial hearing. And finally, in the interest of justice.
Thank you, Bill. Oh, well, actually, Bill motioned. It's not showing up. And then Yolanda, go ahead and push the button. Then.
Oops.
That's the postponement motion still up on our screen. Okay. Mr. Pico?
I'm not going to support this to dismiss. I thought long and hard about it. You've got 5 members of the Ethics Commission that all came to the same conclusion, different reasons. It certainly doesn't, it's not a major, huge thing to burn down the buildings over, but I cannot ignore that. I think there is grounds in there, and that's why I'll not support this motion.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. David?
I want to preface this by saying I can certainly understand why this issue was brought from a subjective perspective. There was, from a subjective perspective, there were reasons to bring this. I've got a couple of comments that I wanted to elaborate on. Why I was so focused on the relevant provisions of the city code. Richard's official capacity had nothing to do with interjecting to this to say, I know who she is. That's what he was offering. Is he was offering to say to this person involved in an automobile accident, I know who she is. I can vouch for her. I can tell you who her identity is. That's not, in my opinion, and there's no evidence anywhere, the issues that I was looking at of special consideration, treatment, or advantage beyond that available to anybody else. Whether I'm sitting as a member of city council or 3 years ago when I wasn't on city council, everybody has the right to say, I know who you are, and to submit something. That's the gap that I was looking to talk about. The gap is not there. I want to comment one other thing on interest of justice, because it's something that I think people can be a little bit uncertain of what that means. But as a prosecuting attorney, dismissed several cases in the interest of justice. Doesn't mean there wasn't probable cause to charge the individual. Doesn't mean that there wasn't sufficient evidence to say I'm concerned about this, as what happened with Ms. Sutherland. But going forward, what we're dealing with is an expensive, difficult, long-term process that's going to be at the city's dime, but it's going to be to a different standard of proof. Instead of preponderance of evidence, which is where we're at now, it is going to be at clear and convincing evidence. I'm not going to give an education in evidentiary law. I will say that clear and convincing evidence is substantially higher. The burden is substantially higher, and the judge needs to find by clear and convincing evidence, not just by a preponderance of evidence, which is what the standard is for for the Independent Ethics Commission. And so in the interest of justice, the question has to be considered, is it worth the expenditure of resources to go forward with a case that I don't think they're going to be able to prove? The answer from my perspective is no, it is not. It doesn't make worthwhile, particularly given the overwhelming mitigating factors that the Independent Ethics Commission found.
Thank you, David. Yolanda?
I am going to support this motion because based on what was said, I don't see this as a violation of the ethics code. Richard was saying, here's my identification, you know how to find me. It was to vouch for her, to say, you know how to find me. Nothing like, I think you guys are going to see it all anyway. There was something about a sandwich and trying to give a sandwich free. He wasn't trying to get anything free. He wasn't trying to get special favors. It was all about just, this is it. And the build up to this was that he was saying it over and over. And when I hear Tom talk, and I think Richard and Tom's voices are so far apart. Tom can ask us a question and I'll get scared because he talks really loud. Richard can ask me the same question, but he talks very soft. And when Tom's reading what Richard says, that's not Richard. Richard talks like Merv and just softer. And so in that he's expressing himself, I'm sure there's frustration, but not the kind that a lot of people here would, even myself probably. So I think it would be an unjust to see this as a violation. As city council members, we're held to a higher standard, but we are constantly degraded and told how we're not doing things right. And and we have to, we take it. We take it with a grain of salt. But to be held to a standard that you're like a god and that you're not a human being. I mean, we're human beings, first and foremost. And so we have emotions, but to say that those emotions we're trying to get a special interest out of it or make something happen, no. We have reactions. We get sad. We care about people. And so to see this as a violation, it's not. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Yolanda. Don?
Well, three things. First is comments back to Dave on some issues you raised, and then how I'm going to vote and why. And I don't have the book in front of me, so I can't quote chapter and verse. But from my recollection, the majority opinion of 4, it's not just that Richard said, I'm Richard Skorman, President of City Council, I can vouch for her. But it was the second part of that. Can't you just exchange information and let her go? And that is where the majority of 4, the second half of that sentence is what created, in their mind, that's what created. As far as the expenses that could potentially lie in front of us, yeah, that's a potential, but that's not a given fact. If we refer this to an ALG, Richard always has the option of sitting in and saying, no, I accept the finding of the IEC. I'm not requiring an ALG. We can leave it right here. And really, that is going to be the easiest way to put this thing to bed, not only legally, but publicly. The last case that went through this, there was a lot of us on council that wish that the person that was accused would have put it to bed. I mean, the worst thing that happens is you get a censure. And as we discussed here, I think all of us are kind of in the thing that there's no punishment. So you look at, was there a violation, yes or no? What the penalty phase is, it's so minor, Richard's already apologized. We don't need to take this forward. And this is why I will not be supporting the motion because of that first half. We can all sit up here and say, yes, we know Richard, and no, it's not going to affect our judgment. But we have 5 people, 5 out of 5, of an independent ethics commission. Independent. They're not members of council. These are 5 citizens of the community that we picked to be our conscience, to go in and look at it. And 5 for 5 of them are saying there was a violation. And if we turn around and say, no, we don't agree with you, we know better that one of our own did not do that, this is not going to die. We are sitting here and saying, and I can see the headlines now, and probably out of both sides, the papers that represent either side of the spectrum, council protects one of its own. If this was a 3-2, putting our own things in here would make a lot more sense. But for council to turn around and say, we're going to ignore the advice of 5 citizens who do think that this is a ethics violation, and if there's 5 of them for 5 out of subject matter experts people that we pick to be our subject matter experts, there's probably a ton more out there in the city that believe so as well. In this, I think, we owe it to them for them doing their jobs, to go in there. This ALG and the concern you have is only if Richard takes it forward, and then whatever the ALG decides, the way we rewrote the reg, we're bound by that decision. I can't remember why we didn't do it. I probably argued, being the one that argued for it in the 2 years that we were rewriting the reg, that we're not bound by an ICE commission when it's one of our own. This bothers me that we want to dismiss when we're supposed to be holding ourselves, asking the people to trust us, holding ourselves to a higher standard of ethics. You got 5 individuals where Richard is not one of their own saying there was a violation, and now we're going to protect one of our own. I just cannot support that path forward.
Okay, Don, thanks. Tom?
Yeah, one comment, and then I'll tell you why I'm going to vote the way I vote. Ms. Avila, I'm sorry if my voice scares you. I thought talking loud was going to be helpful to you so you could hear, and I made a special effort to do that. I won't do that any further. Well, then I'll talk a lot quieter so that you won't be scared. I don't mean to do that. I couldn't agree more with the comments Mr. Knight just made about our independent ethics committee. Independent. We go to great lengths to select these people like we do, our planning commission. And quite frankly, when they're unanimous in something and you don't pay attention to that, I wonder how they're going to go back to their families and wonder what contribution they're making to this community when this city council decides just, to essentially ignore what they've said in this report. And 4 of the 5 were online for everything. They did spend months on this report. The 5th, concurred in the result that there was a finding. Not a finding that is so serious that it's going to amount to any kind of penalty, but a finding nonetheless. And quite frankly, Mr. Geisler talked about, to get to this point, these commissioners had to reach that preponderance of the evidence, and they did. And quite frankly, I think by not sending this to an administrative law judge where they've got to find clear and convincing evidence that this section that we stated 4 or 5 times was violated, I don't think that he or she is going to make that finding, and essentially would find that Mr. Skorman did nothing wrong, and in the public clear his name. I consider him not only a colleague, but I consider him a friend. And I am not doing this to hurt him. I am doing this to forward it in a process where the people, the public, are going to believe that we treated Mr. Skorman like we would any other citizen, and that, in fact, we give him the opportunity so that he would be totally vindicated going forward to this next administrative law judge. We are cheating him with this motion of that opportunity, and that's why I will not support this motion.
Okay. Bill?
Well, it's not protecting one of our own. It's looking at all the facts that were generated. Unfortunately, we have somewhat of a history where 12 members of a jury will give somebody the death penalty, only to discover that individual was not even guilty. Now, it is our job, and that's why we're structured this way, to come back in and look at the preponderance of information and how they arrived at this information. We all have the exact same information they had. We have the videos that they had, all right, but we're still coming up with additional questions and qualifications. The motion is to dismiss because of the preponderance of evidence does not suggest that he used his position to get favored treatment. It's just not there. And that's the decision we're making right now. The preponderance of evidence, even after these 5 folks who were all over the place about it, even after all of the videos, which you'll all see, everyone in this community will see every bit of information we have. You'll make your own determination. Okay, again, we'll have all these juries and courts everywhere adjudicating this thing. But as far as this council should be concerned, okay, is the preponderance of evidence suggest that these charges are not correct, regardless of ever 5 people looked at it independently or not. So all I ask you to do is support the dismissal and stand the ground.
Okay. Yolanda?
I just want to speak to that there was a unanimous vote with the 5 commission, and it's like they know better. And there have been times that the planning commission has been unanimous, and I have not voted in that direction because I come from another perspective, and I look at my constituents. And so, I don't know, Dawn, if the panel, planning commission has been completely unanimous, but you voted against it because you had a different view of how things needed to be done. So I think it's not fair to say that we're protecting our own, or we're going with I'm going with what I see and how I also worked in the law, criminal investigation for 21 years. And so I'm going with what I've learned and how I read things. And as you can tell, when during closed session, I had a lot of questions when I was reviewing this material. I had tons of questions. So to say that, well, we have this panel and we've got to go with them, they were unanimous, I don't think that can be imposed by another counselor to say that. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay. Thank you, Yolanda. David?
And Mr. Knight, just in response to your discussion about what the findings were, on page 7 of the majority opinion, the majority indicates that there would be no ethical violation had Richard done exactly what he had done, which presumably means that it would have been something that would have been available to anybody else, so long as he used his driver's license or his business cards. Anything else, but the fact that he used and reached in and pulled out the one thing that was most amenable to him, which was the card. So it wasn't that they tried to just exchange information and let her go. It was that he did it in this particular way as opposed to more of a different sort of way. And that's important because if you look at the concurring opinion, the concurring opinion disagrees with that completely and utterly. And I'm reading from page 4 of the concurring opinions report. In my opinion, finding an ethical violation simply based upon Mr. Skorman's attempt to vouch for Ms. Mycutt after identifying himself as the city council president would be to disregard common sense and would require a hyper-technical interpretation of the ethics code. If the conversation had simply ended after Ms. Sutherland rejected his offer to vouch for the identity of Ms. Mycutt, I would not have found a violation. He then goes on and says, but the subsequent conversation devolved into something that was accusatory in nature, and that's what rendered this an improper opinion. That's not a violation of the ethics code. That's where the concurring opinion, in my opinion, makes a mistake. Just because there is heightened anger, anxiety, or whatever, that doesn't render this a violation of the code of ethics. And so I agree with the analysis of the concurring opinion completely. I disagree with his conclusion that simply because there is a disagreement that devolves into accusatory nature after several hours of people at the scene of an accident, that doesn't rise to the level of an ethics code violation. There's nothing in that section that I cited that says that raising a voice gets to the level of ethics. I will say I asked Tracy for the code of conduct because I was going to make a referral for the code of conduct because I do think there's some conduct issues here. To say that it's an ethical violation, I think is way pejorative. I don't think anybody's saying that there's anything that is morally unethical, but to label something as an ethical violation kind of gives that. I'm really disappointed with the toothlessness of our code of conduct, and I think that's something we need to look at as well. Because I do think that there should be conduct that is expected of us. But this falls between the gaps. It is toothless on the code of conduct. I wish it was a little bit stronger, and I think that's something we need to take a look at.
Okay. Thank you, David. I think everybody has spoken, so I am going to call a vote, but I will very briefly add my own remarks, and that is that in my opinion, I do not believe that Mr. Skorman did anything, that there was any evidence that provided that proves that Mr. Skorman did anything contrary to our own council rules and that were an ethical violation. So I will support the motion. And in regard to the IEC, I do very much appreciate their work. They are volunteers. We are almost volunteers. People disagree with us all the time, which is their right, even though we do a lot of work. And unlike Don, even though they do a lot of work, I don't believe that I owe them anything. I kind of bristle at that. All of these boards and commissions advise us, and I very much appreciate that, but we are the ones that have to make that final decision. And with that, I will call a vote. Do we have to have more conversation?
You got 2 more minutes?
Just one very brief comment. As I look at this has the very large potential to be 4-4, which means nothing happens, and I think something has to happen.
Yes.
And part of the reason for the vote that I'm going to make is I suspect that it will allow something to happen. 4-4 means that we are doing nothing and that nothing moves forward.
Okay, Mr. Knight?
Well, and comment back to your response, you're not owing them.
I don't know.
Just remember that the next time you sit up on the dais and say, these are the staff, these are my members, we need to honor what they say. You have said that numerous times in the 5 years that we have been on council.
Okay. Thank you,
I just
Mr.
find
Knight.
that ironic.
Okay, let's vote. And the motion to dismiss passes 5-3 with Mr. Knight, Mr. Pico, and Mr. Strand voting in opposition. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting.